What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Danny and Bush coming at you with the last installment of our ranking series for the month of August. We're tackling the wide receivers today, 1 through 15. We're going to go through these guys. Since we've talked about wide receivers for so long, talking about the RB dead zone for 3 months, and we've talked about these guys ad nauseum, we're going to go through these guys and try and pick up the pace a little bit, not go quite as in-depth. So if you guys want more in-depth opinions on some of these guys, I'm sure they've been featured in other videos. You can check our June rankings for some more in-depth analysis on them.
Yeah, absolutely. And we already talked about the quarterbacks, running backs, and tight ends. So we're rounding off our rankings videos with these wide receivers. This is going to be our last rankings video of the year because, again, next week, we are jam-packing your week with superlatives, breakouts, predictions. You guys cannot miss that. And again, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, you better do so because, again, it's going to be wild.
Yeah, for sure. Me and Danny are running on no sleep right now, so we'll try and bring our own energy. I just chugged a huge thing of green juice before I did this, so I'd have some energy. So we're going to hit the intro, and then we're going to get right into it. Okay, so you guys should be able to see our rankings on the screen right now. If this is all you came for, you just wanted to see who they were, I encourage you to watch to the end to help us out in the YouTube algorithm. But these are the top 15 rankings as we see it in consensus. You guys can see our wide receiver 1 is Davante Adams. He is currently the wide receiver 1 in ADP as well, going off the board at the 7th overall pick. So we've already talked about it. Davante Adams is a guy that we both view as a top 5 player in fantasy this year. He's a guy that once those top 3 running backs, maybe top 4, if you want to include Zeke, I want to include Saquon Barkley in that conversation. That's right where you get into the Davante Adams territory. And a lot of people in your home leagues are going to shy away from Davante Adams because he doesn't play running back, because they want to load up on running backs. But I encourage you not to shy away from Davante Adams. We're talking about a guy that had 18 touchdowns in 14 games last year. Him and Aaron Rodgers are bringing it back. It's the last dance. They're going to be firing on all cylinders. This is a guy that is legitimately guaranteed 160, 170 targets from an MVP caliber quarterback. It is really not something you want to overthink. If Davante Adams is on the board and you're picking 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th overall in your home league draft, go ahead and take him because this is a bona fide advantage at the wide receiver position, similar to what we saw from Antonio Brown for a number of years.
Yeah, this is legitimately the Christian McCaffrey of wide receivers. I mean, as good as everybody else was at the position last year, this is a guy who had 18 touchdowns in 13 and a half games. He was absolutely pacing the position. And with Aaron Rodgers coming back, I would have no problems taking this guy within the top 6 overall picks in fantasy football. He's currently my 5th overall ranked player. Again, if Saquon Barkley is healthy, I can see that debate as well. But aside from that, I mean, you cannot go wrong with taking a guy like Davante Adams, 170 plus targets, touchdown upside that he has in this offense. So we can move on to number 2. And speaking of touchdown upside and speaking of really good quarterback play, Tyreek Hill of the Kansas City Chiefs, both of our number 2 ranked. And you have him in the same tier as Davante Adams. I actually have Davante Adams alone at the top in his own tier, but I fully see the reasoning. I mean, Tyreek Hill is an absolute stud, over 20 half PPR points per game last year, and is always going to be a threat to lead the league in touchdowns with Patrick Mahomes slinging him the rock.
Yeah, exactly. And with Tyreek Hill, too, you get those week-winning big plays. You get those 40-point weeks. Last year against the Buccaneers, unfortunately, we saw him drop, 45 points in the first quarter of the game last year. That's exactly the type of ceiling that you're getting with Tyreek Hill. So if you play in any league that rewards big plays, I know my home league rewards plays of 40-plus yards, then Tyreek Hill might even see an even bigger bump up, which is why I have him in the same tier as Davante Adams in that kind of scoring format. So it's all going to depend on your flavor. I would say if you're in a full PPR league, I think Davante Adams and probably Stefon Diggs and Calvin Ridley all have higher reception upside than what Tyreek Hill is going to present you. But there's really nothing I can complain with about Tyreek Hill. This is a guy, again, when you're deciding between questionable running backs at the end of the first, early second round, if Tyreek Hill falls to pick 11, pick 12, pick 201, pick 202, and you're deciding between a Joe Mixon and Tyreek Hill, just take the wide receiver. There's no reason to. And people made this mistake last year, right? They wanted to take Miles Sanders and Kenyon Drake at the 1-2 turn, but when you have a stud wide receiver, he can be that big of an advantage in your roster. It's not just the wide receiver position. There's so many good ones. There's not so many Tyreek Hills. He's a complete unicorn, really. The only guy that I can trust with like 135 targets to be a top 5 wide receiver year in and year out.
And yeah, the one thing I'll quickly say before we go into number 3 is people want to make a claim, oh, running backs are scarce, running backs are scarce. You got to take the ones at the top. At the same time, though, if you're looking at it, if you're comparing the RB10 on the season versus Tyreek Hill, Stefon Diggs are going to be, top 3 wide receivers, it's clear as day to me that I want the advantage. I want the elite play at the wide receiver position. I'm not just going to force a player out my board because he plays a position. So I fully agree there. And again, Davante Adams, my 5th overall player. Tyreek Hill is 1 spot behind him right now at 6th overall. So I do see kind of a tier break between 5 and 6, but I still love Tyreek Hill. And speaking of a first-round caliber wide receiver, my 7th overall player, another wide receiver, Stefon Diggs of the Buffalo Bills. And everything we kind of mentioned with Davante Adams in terms of the target value applies to Stefon Diggs. The biggest difference between Adams and Diggs would be the touchdown total, because Stefon Diggs, as good as he was, 127 receptions, over 1,500 receiving yards, both really at the top of the league. It's just the touchdown total year 1 with Josh Allen that wasn't on par with the rest of the elite wide receivers. But if he is able to see a significant jump, if he's able to see positive regression, again, we don't throw that term around lightly here. If we see positive regression because he is a phenomenal player with a great quarterback on an offense that wants to throw the ball, Stefon Diggs at 10, 11, 12 touchdowns could legitimately have a case for wide receiver 1 overall.
Yeah, I don't disagree. It's pretty obvious to me why I have Stefon Diggs at 3. It's because he doesn't have 12, 13, 14, 15 touchdown upside. And it's not because he's not talented enough. He definitely is. But the usage that a guy like Davante Adams sees in the red zone, the usage that Tyreek Hill sees with big plays and in the red zone, make them a better bet for touchdowns. And in a full PPR league, I think you could definitely make the argument that Stefon Diggs belongs ahead of Tyreek Hill, because he probably will outpace him by like 20, 30 receptions on the season. If I wouldn't be shocked at all if that were the case. So it's all kind of pick your flavor. If you're going for more reception upside in a PPR league, then Stefon Diggs might be your wide receiver 2. But again, you said he was your 7th or 8th overall player. He's currently my 12th overall player. These are the 3 wide receivers that I have in that first round range, that top 12 range in my overall rankings. Stefon Diggs currently going off the board as the 14th overall player right now, the wide receiver 3. This is a guy that you can get at the 1-2 turn. You can get him in the second round. You can start your draft with a Najee Harris at 10 and get Stefon Diggs in the second round. And to me, that is tremendous value. So we're going to move on to the wide receiver 4. Consensus in our rankings is Calvin Ridley. He's currently going off the board as the wide receiver 5, actually, in ADP, 17th overall. So this is a guy that you can routinely get in the mid-second round. And I actually think he is one of the best values of these elite guys, because DeAndre Hopkins, and I mean, rightfully so, DeAndre Hopkins is great, but he consistently goes ahead of Calvin Ridley. And I don't think he should, because kind of the similar case that we made for Davante Adams and Stefon Diggs, Calvin Ridley has shown a lot more touchdown upside than what DeAndre Hopkins showed with Arizona last year. Calvin Ridley, as a rookie, scored 10 touchdowns, and on like limited targets. He scored a lot of touchdowns last year with Julio Jones in the fold. I think we could be legitimately talking about a guy that scores 12, 13, 14 touchdowns and paces the top of the league for targets with Julio Jones now out of the mix.
Yeah, and honestly, this may sound like a bold prediction. I fully understand that. I'm not fully making this case, but the bull case, the top case for Calvin Ridley, we could see this guy have an ascension similar to what Davante Adams experienced a couple years ago, where Davante Adams was a mid-second round pick. Everybody's like, yo, he should be on the horizon to break out. He should be a touchdown scoring threat. But everything is aligning for Calvin Ridley to have that game-breaking, fantasy football breaking potential. 170 targets could be on the table with Julio Jones leaving. And we've seen over these past few years, this guy has legitimately scored 8, 9, 10 touchdowns, even despite missing games in those time frames. So if he plays a full 17-game sample size without Julio Jones on the field, this could be a 13 touchdown receiver on 170 targets. So you could be talking about a season where he puts up 120 catches, 1,500 yards, and 12, 13 touchdowns. And if he's doing that, again, he's going to be contending with Davante Adams. He's going to be contending with Tyreek Hill, Stefon Diggs for that number 1 overall wide receiver spot. He's got that full potential to take that next step up into not only being an elite wide receiver, but a league-winning wide receiver. So I love Calvin Ridley.
Yeah, I don't disagree there. I think he is well on his way to becoming a full, bona fide number 1 receiver. A lot of people might be a little concerned if he can handle number 1 cornerbacks. We've seen from his perception profile that Calvin Ridley has been a number 1 receiver this whole time. He had Julio Jones on the other side of him. So the next receiver on the list here, we have DeAndre Hopkins, who is our wide receiver 5 in consensus, currently going off the board as the wide receiver 4, 15th overall. So a little bit higher than where Calvin Ridley is going. I don't usually end up with a lot of DeAndre Hopkins, usually because I'll take Calvin Ridley over him. But again, this is another guy that if you're deciding between questionable running backs, and what I would consider questionable running backs as CEH and Joe Mixon and some of these other guys that are going in that mid-second round range, if you're going to be drafting guys like that over DeAndre Hopkins, I think you're doing yourself a disservice in fantasy this year, because while DeAndre Hopkins probably doesn't have the same 12 touchdown upside, and I don't want to give him hate on him too much from a touchdown perspective, because he's shown that in the past in Houston, but I just personally don't think Kyler Murray is like as good of a quarterback as Deshaun Watson was for DeAndre Hopkins in Houston. So if he only scores 8, 9, 10 touchdowns, he's still going to be a guy that is at the top of the league in targets, at the top of the league in receptions, and probably amongst the league's leaders in receiving yards too. So I think one of the safest picks you can make in the second round, and who still has a top 3, top 5 ceiling pretty considerably.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love DeAndre Hopkins again. I didn't talk about where I currently have Calvin Ridley, but for reference, Calvin Ridley is my 13th overall player. DeAndre Hopkins is my 14th overall player. I'm perfectly fine with taking him, especially if you are at that 112, 201 turn, 111, 202 turn. I'm fine with even doubling up on both these guys. I think they both got the talent and upside to be able to really return their value there. But when you're talking about DeAndre Hopkins, the case is simple. 170 targets, very good, very fast-paced offense, and maybe from an efficiency standpoint, from the touchdown perspective, Kyler Murray can take a third-year leap. And if that's the case, I mean, DeAndre Hopkins is that number one weapon for a reason. He only scored 6 touchdowns last year, despite having 1,400 yards, over 110 receptions. If he can take a slight uptick in that receiving touchdown game, I mean, he could be eclipsing those Stefon Diggs area, that Calvin Ridley area. So I fully agree. Although he is my 5 pretty comfortably, I still would prefer the touchdown upside of guys like Hill and Ridley, who are, similar area in terms of their ADP.
He did have a number of down games too. I remember DeAndre Hopkins owners probably remember that he had a number of just like really bad outings where he was like finishing with under 10 half PPR fantasy points. And he actually had more fantasy points under 10 than Mike Evans did last year, who's usually considered to be like a boomer bust wide receiver. So hopefully Kyler Murray can take another step forward. I think that's probably the culprit for DeAndre Hopkins having some inconsistencies here and there, is the inconsistency of the quarterback. So let's move on to the next receiver that we have on the list here, and that is AJ Brown. He's currently your wide receiver 6, my wide receiver 7, and then I have Keenan Allen as my wide receiver 6, and he's your wide receiver 7. So technically we have a tie here at 6, but AJ Brown currently going off the board as the wide receiver 8 in ADP right now, 24th overall pick. This is exactly the reason, this player really is exactly the reason we love going with the hero RB strategy if you pick 1, 2, or 3, because we know that you can routinely get AJ Brown at the back of the second round. And this is a guy that we've seen probably might be one of the 2 or 3 best actual physical specimens at the wide receiver position in the NFL. He's good for 5, 6, 7 plays a year that are absolutely highlight reel week winning plays, just like what you get from a guy like Tyreek Hill. He has some target competition, obviously, with Julio Jones now in the fold, but this is still a guy that I think is going to be, even if he only gets 120, 130 targets, this should be a guy that is routinely finishing inside the top 12 wide receivers week in and week out, because he has that big play potential, and because this offense I expect to move the ball at will with all the weapons that they have.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree here. The bull case, it's like we can kind of lump them together with AJ Brown and Keenan Allen. The bull case for them is actually the exact opposite. With AJ Brown, you're looking for big plays. You're looking for splash, touchdown, a guy that's going to take the slant to the house. With Keenan Allen, you're looking at a guy that, similar to a DeAndre Hopkins, if he's at his ceiling, is going to hit 165, 170 targets, PPR type of monster type of archetype. So it all honestly a pick your poison type of thing, whether you want to take the safety, quote unquote, of a Keenan Allen versus the big play potential of an AJ Brown. But they're 6 and 7 for me. They're quite literally back to back on my overall rankings, 20th and 21st. Listen, if you're getting either of these guys in a hero RB build, you have Christian McCaffrey, you're able to pair AJ Brown and Keenan Allen on your turn. You're smashing those first 3 rounds of your draft.
Yeah, I totally agree. I have him 19 with Keenan Allen and 20 with AJ Brown. I think they're kind of like the light version of Tyreek Hill and Stefon Diggs towards the 2-3 range. I think they bring similar elements to the table, with Keenan Allen being compared to Diggs with the target volume, and then AJ Brown bringing the big play upside that Tyreek Hill has. So on Keenan Allen, one quick thing I would like to say is, if you guys are unsure why we have Keenan Allen so high, it's because this guy legitimately had 0 games of under double-digit targets when he played the full game and Justin Herbert was the quarterback last year. This guy was legitimately a target monster. We already have Mike Williams dealing with an injury. Surprise, surprise. That's the story of Mike Williams' career so far. Hunter Henry has gone in the red zone, which maybe opens up a little bit more a red zone opportunity for a guy like Keenan Allen. He's never really been a huge touchdown scorer in his career, but it wouldn't shock me at all if we're talking about a guy that has 165 targets, 12 touchdowns, 1,400 receiving yards, and is a top 3 receiver this year.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with Keenan Allen. And this offense, Justin Herbert in particular, has already gone out and said they want to throw the ball down the field. They want to really get their playmakers in space, and no better playmaker on that team, especially in the receiving game, than Keenan Allen. So I fully agree there. We can go on to our consensus 8. And this is kind of like the quote-unquote first disagreement. Although we have A.J. Brown and Keenan Allen kind of flip-flopped here, this kind of 3 range that we're going to have in a row of starting with DK Metcalf is basically guys that we both have in different spots. So we'll start with DK Metcalf, who's currently, based on our consensus, at 8, where you have him at 8, I have him at 10.
Yeah, and DK Metcalf, he actually goes off the board a little bit before we have him. He's currently the wide receiver 6 in ADP, 19th overall pick. So this is a guy that you're getting right behind Calvin Ridley, usually in most of the mock drafts that you're going to do and most of the drafts that you're going to see. The reason we have him a little bit lower is, as we've kind of talked about most of the offseason, the inconsistencies of the Seahawks offense from a pass volume perspective from Russell Wilson's play last year makes me a little bit nervous about DK Metcalf, but at the same time, it's still DK Metcalf. I'm not going to fade DK Metcalf. I'm not an idiot. I'm just going to take some of the other guys around him ahead of him, like Keenan Allen, like AJ Brown, and like Calvin Ridley. So that's kind of my thoughts on DK Metcalf. This isn't a guy that I'm fading necessarily. This is just a guy I don't usually end up with because he's going in that mid-second round range where I would rather take some of those other wide receivers. But you're getting everything that you're getting really out of Tyreek Hill with DK Metcalf. You're just not quite getting as much consistency from Russell Wilson as you are from Patrick Mahomes.
Or overall offensive passing output, in my opinion, in terms of volume. And although I love DK Metcalf, the talent, the specimen, the offense that he's in, we're just playing a really competitive game. Again, I think this big range of wide receivers, especially this quote-unquote tier 3, is very close. You can make arguments for a lot of players. The reason why I would grow hesitant in ranking DK Metcalf higher than the 10th spot I currently have him is because his schedule against opposing shadow corners to start the year, comparatively to the other guys, is pretty damn hard. And I get it. DK Metcalf is a phenomenal wide receiver. It shouldn't really matter what cornerback he faces in general. But when we're playing the tiebreaker game and we're talking about elite level talents at the position going off this 2-3 turn, that's enough for me to have him at the bottom of this tier. Again, still in that 6 to 10 tier with AJ Brown. You guys would have saw it earlier, but enough for me to quote unquote fade him, even though I would still be fine with take him if he fell to me at value.
Justin Jefferson, another guy, another young wide receiver that's going at that 2-3 turn type area, currently going off the board at the wide receiver 7, 23rd overall. Again, another great wide receiver to pair with Christian McCaffrey if you have the first overall pick and you want to go for a Christian McCaffrey and then a double wide receiver, or Justin Jefferson and Darren Waller build at the beginning of your draft. So with Justin Jefferson, I think the case is pretty clear. Obviously, we saw him put up the greatest rookie season in terms of receiving yards that we've ever seen from a rookie wide receiver. He did it on a run-first offense nonetheless, too. And he, I think, is clearly the number one in this offense. I'm not really concerned about Adam Thielen taking away targets from him. The one thing I am a little bit concerned about, though, is the fact that this offense does run through Dalvin Cook still. It's still going to be the Dalvin Cook show on how they move the ball. And once they get into the red zone, they run the ball with Dalvin Cook. So the overall passing volume of this offense is kind of another reason why Justin Jefferson hasn't ended up a lot on a lot of my teams, because I think the Chargers with Justin Herbert, I think the Titans with A.J. Brown, I think these teams are probably going to throw the ball more and more effectively than what the Minnesota Vikings are doing. But we've talked about the Vikings schedule before. We've talked about the fact that Kirk Cousins has a very easy start to the season, and that definitely 100% impacts Justin Jefferson as well. So this could be a guy that gets off to a wide receiver 1 in fantasy start. And at that point, I mean, you might be able to sell this guy for like, Davante Adams plus, if he's off to like just an absolutely blazing start where he's putting up 150 yards a game for the first couple of weeks of the season. That is definitely within the, range of outcomes given the Vikings schedule early.
I'm glad you mentioned that because his opening schedule is pretty remarkable when you think about it. I'll just outline it for you guys. Cincinnati Bengals to start. I mean, they just lost their number 1 shutdown corner with William Jackson. We talked about it a little bit on the show where we were talking about the owner's box Superflex game where Justin Jefferson was a must start, in my opinion, in week 1 because of that matchup, because of the juicy scoring potential of that game. Arizona Cardinals, listen, they lost their number 1 cornerback in free agency, and guess what? Malcolm Butler ain't it. Seattle Seahawks, high pace scoring game.
Also lost their number 1 corner in free agency.
Cleveland Browns probably the first harder one with Denzel Ward being on that side, but then he's got the Detroit Lions and then a rookie cornerback in J.C. Horn in those first 6 games before his bye week. So if we're comparing it straight up to DK Metcalf, as much as I love DK, I love Justin Jefferson. I think he's as every bit the talent, and now he has a better schedule to start the year, and that's kind of what we look for. We want wins in the early portion of our schedule. If we're comparing wide receiver 8 versus wide receiver 10, that's going to be enough justification for me.
Yep. Yeah, I definitely have no disagreements there. Now let's move on to the last guy kind of in this tier of wide receivers, of young wide receivers that we're very excited about. And Danny's got a big grin on his face and he's perking up because we're about to talk about CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb currently going off the board as the wide receiver 12, 30th overall in ADP. I think a lot of people are going to let him fall a little bit further than that now, knowing that Amari Cooper is back in the lineup. I'm assuming a lot of people were taking CeeDee Lamb towards that 2-3 turn area when they thought Amari Cooper was going to be out for the year, including myself, or not for the year, but like at least to start the year. But Amari Cooper now being back probably presents a little bit of a value dip in terms of where CeeDee Lamb is going to get drafted. And if you can get this guy anywhere outside of the first couple picks of the third round, I think he's a phenomenal value because, I mean, we've talked about the splits with Dak Prescott a million times, but this guy was legitimately a top 12 receiver to start his NFL career the first 5 weeks, which is crazy impressive for a rookie wide receiver. Like we saw what Justin Jefferson did last year, but it took him 3 weeks to do that. CeeDee Lamb wasted no time at the beginning of last year when Dak Prescott was on the field. We know this offense is going to be among the league leaders in pass attempts. There's plenty of volume to go around for Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb. And I think CeeDee Lamb now playing on the outside from what we've seen on in preseason games should have a much higher ceiling too than what we saw from him playing in the slot last year.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. As you guys can clearly tell, I got the grin on my face for a reason. Listen, this is my wide receiver 1 going in draft cycle for a reason. He is absolutely phenomenal. Yards after catch ability, contested catch ability, and he's been used all over the formation so far in training camp and the preseason. I have no qualms. I think CeeDee Lamb is about to break out in a big way. And if you're looking every year for that next superstar talent at the wide receiver position, you got one of those in what's arguably going to be a top 3 passing volume offense with the Dallas Cowboys. I think CeeDee Lamb's ceiling, again, call me biased all you want, I think his ceiling is legitimately a top 3 wide receiver this year.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a possibility. I think Cooper might have to miss a couple games for him to be a top 3 wide receiver, but top 5 wide receiver. It wouldn't shock me if we see a Godwin and Evans situation from a couple years ago with Cooper and Lamb, because both of these guys are going to be the target funnels of a very pass-heavy offense and a pretty efficient pass-heavy offense at that. So to the next guy that we have on the list here, we have Terry McLaurin, wide receiver 10, currently going off the board as the 28th overall player. Terry McLaurin's I've kind of gone back and forth on Terry McLaurin a little bit. He was a guy that I wanted to be like, yes, this is the year, put Terry McLaurin at wide receiver 7 in my rankings or something like that and just go nuts. My one issue with putting Terry McLaurin super, super high is the fact that Ryan Fitzpatrick is a little hot and cold. You can't totally rely on Ryan Fitzpatrick for 100% of the time, great quarterback play. But I do think he is definitely the best quarterback that Terry McLaurin's played with in his entire career, and it's not even really all that close. We've already seen Terry McLaurin produce as a wide receiver 2 in fantasy. We just need to see him take that year 3 leap, that Calvin Ridley, that Chris Godwin leap, with a better quarterback in the fold now as the established number 1 target of this offense. He's still going to have a couple tough corners that he's got to play on his schedule. He's got to play James Bradbury twice a year and stuff like that. But I think he can handle it at this point in his career. He's proven that he has the route running and the after catch ability, the downfield ability. And I think Ryan Fitzpatrick can help facilitate that, especially the downfield part of his game, which was missing with his bad quarterback play in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree. This is an elite talent. If you guys check reception perception, this guy who's at the 90th plus percentile against both man and press. He can beat those top cornerbacks in the NFL. He's never really had the adequate quarterback play to support him. And even despite that, this is a guy who was performing as a top 10 wide receiver prior to his lower body injuries. I believe it was an ankle sprain he was dealing with over those last 5 weeks. He was really in his groove despite not being a prime touchdown scorer. Now with Ryan Fitzpatrick in the mold, he's got all the potential in the world to not only return on wide receiver 11 value where we currently have him in our rankings, but could enter that fray as a top 6, top 5 wide receiver. But again, his ceiling is fully dependent on if we can get a consistent Ryan Fitzpatrick throughout the year. And judging from Ryan Fitzpatrick's career, I'm sure you've seen it as a Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan. There's a lot of hot and cold. There's a lot of up and down with that game. And it's enough for me to kind of slide him a little bit below that CeeDee Lamb, DK Metcalf, Justin Jefferson area of your drafts.
Right. He's a guy I would much rather get as my wide receiver too. If I'm going to go with, let's say I have the third overall pick with like Alvin Kamara and I get AJ Brown in the second round. I get Terry McLaurin on the way back in the third. I think that's a little bit more of a comfortable situation for me because I'm not relying on Terry McLaurin to be my wide receiver one. But nonetheless, I think if you go RB to start and you get Terry McLaurin as your wide receiver one, that's still a great position to be in. So to the next guy that we have on the list here, that is Amari Cooper, the other Cowboys wide receiver 15, currently in ADP 38th overall. So the injury, the ankle injury, the plantar fasciitis that Amari Cooper has dealt with, it sounds like, and maybe you could provide more insight on this. You probably follow the team closer than I do. It sounds like everything's cleared up. He should be good to go. He played in the the second preseason game, and it seemed like he was healthy and ready to go. So he's a guy, like I said, with the Godwin and Evans comparison already. I think both him and CeeDee Lamb can comfortably finish inside the top 12 wide receivers in fantasy this year. And I think both guys have the ceiling to finish top 5, even if neither of them get injured because of the pass volume, because of the efficiency, and because of what we've seen from Cooper when Dak Prescott was on the field last year. This was a guy that was one of the best receivers in fantasy.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I've already made the bull case for him. Was quote unquote on a pace. I'm not going to say the pace every single time because that's just ludicrous to project Dak to throw the ball 50 times a game. But from a pure target share standpoint, he was at over a 25% target share within those first 5 games. Even if you were to extrapolate that over a 16-game sample at, let's even say 40 attempts per game, you say 640 passing attempts for this team, he gets 25% of those. If you guys do the math here, that's 160 targets. Now, do I think he's going to end up equaling 160 targets? No, but could he reside in that 130, 135 range? He's absolutely got the talent to do so. And this offense should be, from a pace standpoint, one of the tops in the league. So, yeah, I already made the case for CeeDee Lamb, but Amari Cooper, from a sheer target standpoint, is probably going to outdo Lamb in that regard. I just think from a pure explosive play, potential touchdown output, as to why I prefer Lamb straight up to Cooper. But I think both are phenomenal values in that third round area.
Yep, no disagreements there. Let's close out this top 15. We have Mike Evans at wide receiver 13 right now. This might seem a little high to some people. He's the wide receiver 14 in ADP, 36th overall player. The big argument against Mike Evans, I just want to address this real quick because I'm sure everybody knows why Mike Evans would be good. High pass volume, good quarterback play. He gets a lot of red zone opportunities, a lot of downfield opportunities. But I think a lot of people have been kind of laid astray by the fact that Antonio Brown out-targeted Mike Evans and Chris Godwin the final 9 games of the season, week 9 through the 4 playoff games or whatever that they had. But the reality of the situation was, if you remove that game in week 17 where Mike Evans left early, he left early in the first quarter, and Antonio Brown during that stretch proceeded to have 15 targets. So that really skews the sample size of saying that Antonio Brown out-targeted Mike Evans and Chris Godwin during that time, because 15 of those targets came in one game when Mike Evans left early. So the one thing I'd caution people to do is look at the reality. In the 10 full games that all 3 of these guys were on the field, you remove week 17 and you remove the NFC Championship game where Antonio Brown was inactive, Mike Evans had the most targets, 81 targets. Godwin had 71. Antonio Brown had 64, and their playing time wasn't equal. Their snaps on average during this time, Evans 83.4%, Godwin 87.4%, and Antonio Brown 53.6%. In my opinion, this is the true representation of this receiving core. A lot of people think it is pretty even across the board. All 3 of these guys are going to get similar targets. I don't think that way. I like Antonio Brown as a sleeper in the 7th, 8th round, but I don't think he's going to match Chris Godwin and Mike Evans for playing time, for targets. I think it's clearly these 2 guys as the top 2 receivers. Antonio Brown will mix in the most, obviously, but he'll mix in with Scotty Miller and Tyler Johnson and some of the other receivers that they have there.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree there. And obviously, you're going to make a better case about Evans than me because you follow this team closely, similar to why I can make more of a case for those Cowboys wide receivers. When you are able to follow a team closely, when you're able to see the training camp headlines, see the usage, being able to study your team that closely helps you out. And yeah, like the Mike Evans slander I've seen across Twitter, across other YouTube pages, it's ridiculous. I mean, this guy has been consistent ever since he's come into the league, and yet people want to bash him. It's unreal to me. And this Antonio Brown, I've seen hot takes. Antonio Brown's going to outproduce Mike Evans. Like, shut up. No, you don't watch football. That's not how it works. Like, okay, cool. Do I like Michael Gallup? Absolutely. Do I think he's going to outscore Amari Cooper and Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb? No freaking chance. So we can transition now to Julio Jones, who's been a really good staple of fantasy football across really his entire career. I mean, this is a guy who's been the poster child of wide receiver success from a year-to-year consistent basis, and now moves over to the Tennessee Titans to pair with our number 6 name on the list with A.J. Brown over there. And the case is simple. This should be one of the top offenses in the NFL. We talked about it with Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb. We talked about it with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. This is a pair of elite wide receivers on an elite efficiency offense. Do I think each of these guys is going to get 135, 140 targets? No, but do I think they have to return on their current ADP? I don't think so. I think we could be talking about Julio Jones getting 130 targets, putting up his classic 1,350 yards, and maybe he has an uptick in touchdowns with this efficient system over there in Tennessee. So you got A.J. Brown, you got Julio Jones, you got Derrick Henry in the backfield. Let's not overthink this. At the end of the day, this is fantasy football, and we like breaking down the numbers. But from a real-life football perspective, you don't think having that type of alpha talent on an offense is going to open up opportunities from the efficiency standpoint of every single piece of it? I believe it. You believe it. Julio Jones, great value right now in the 4th round.
Yeah, the fact that you can get this guy in the 4th round is absolutely absurd because I think he has a very high ceiling still. I think he actually has a good chance of leading this team in targets, even though A.J. Brown has been with Ryan Tannehill longer. We're also getting a situation where Julio Jones might be a guy that actually sees secondary coverage from a team for once because A.J. Brown is just that explosive. They might see with Julio Jones a little bit up there in age now, maybe the A.J. Brown is the focal point of stopping this passing game. And then we're getting Julio on number 2 corners, which won't end well for opposing defenses. So the final guy that we're going to get into on this list, wide receiver 15 currently in our consensus, is Allen Robinson. He's going off the board as the wide receiver 11, 29th overall. Now, if you guys have our draft guide, then you know that I'm a little bit lower on Allen Robinson. He's my wide receiver 17. And the reason really is because the Bears were top 10 in pass attempts last year. Once Justin Fields does take over the starting job, it is still a rookie quarterback. I'm not exactly sure he's an upgrade over what he saw with Mitch Trubisky last year and in years past for Allen Robinson. And even with that, Allen Robinson has never finished higher than the wide receiver 14 in points per game. So wide receiver 1 potential is not really something that Allen Robinson has flashed thus far in his Chicago Bears career. And he's been a guy that has routinely been in the top 5 leaders of the NFL in targets. So the fact that he's getting that much volume and he hasn't really shown that top 5 overall ceiling makes me a little concerned with drafting a guy around players like we've talked about already that I just think have higher ceilings than Allen Robinson. So it's nothing against the player. I think he's going to finish wide receiver 13, wide receiver 14 in points per game, as he always does. But I can't take him over a guy like CeeDee Lamb. I can't take him over a guy even like Terry McLaurin or Mike Evans because I believe those guys have higher ceilings than him. And once this offense is Justin Fields ran, I think they're going to be a very run-heavy approach as well, and that might affect his target share a little bit. And another thing we didn't even talk about is Darnell Mooney and Cole Kmet. If they're able to carve out better roles for themselves, that could eat into his target share as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit more optimistic than you, but I agree with your full premise that Allen Robinson over guys like Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb currently in ADP just doesn't make much sense considering the fact that although Allen Robinson has shown to be a consistent wide receiver 1-2 type over these last few years, he doesn't have the ceiling of any of those guys. And at the end of the day here, we've said it so many times on this channel, you draft for ceiling in your fantasy drafts. You're not trying to draft for 3rd, 4th, 5th place in your league. You're drafting for 1st. So if I'm comparing CeeDee Lamb, a potential breakout, potential target hog in this offense with touchdown upside, Allen Robinson has been one of the leaders in targets over the last 4 years and still hasn't been able to eclipse top 6, top 7 overall numbers. Yes, he's got the talent to do so, but at the same time, as you mentioned, as much as I am optimistic on Justin Fields, expecting him to come in as a rookie and support a top 6, top 7 overall wide receiver in fantasy, I just don't see being the case. So I agree with you here. As much as I like Allen Robinson, the player, he's my wide receiver 13. I probably wouldn't touch him until the early to mid 4th round.
Yeah, it would be hard for him. If he had Aaron Rodgers as his quarterback or Patrick Mahomes or something, I'm sure he could be a top 5 wide receiver in fantasy. It's just Justin Fields, maybe in his second year, he shows a lot as a rookie, and then we can fully project that ceiling like I said at the beginning of the video for Keenan Allen. Maybe that's what we're looking at Allen Robinson as next year. But as of right now, I'm just going to assume that this is a guy that is more likely to finish as the wide receiver 11 than the wide receiver 4 in fantasy. So that's the whole video. If you guys enjoyed at any point, like, comment, subscribe. We are on the road to 5,000 subscribers. We are almost there right now as we're recording this. Maybe by the time you're seeing this, we're already at 5,000 subscribers. So we definitely appreciate the support. We've grown a tremendous amount over the past couple of weeks with Prime Fantasy Draft season happening. If you guys want to support us in any way, you know the drill. Go to UnderdogFantasy.com. deposit using promo code FSE, you'll get $25 on top of a minimum $10 deposit. Both of our draft guides for free. That means all of our rankings, sleepers, busts, breakouts, strategy articles, all that stuff. And officially, we are ending the Pristine auction deal on Saturday. So the last chance that you guys have to sign up using promo code FSE on pristineauction.com is on Saturday. So do that before Saturday and you'll have a chance to win a free AIYUK jersey, autographed and licensed, free DeAndre Swift jersey, completely licensed and autographed as well, and free Alvin KAMARA jersey. You can win one of those jerseys just for signing up using the code. So you won't want to miss that. Anyway, do you have anything else or should we head out of here?
I think we pretty much covered it other than the fact that we are ready to break this next week of fantasy football. So stay tuned, buckle up your seatbelts because it's going to be one heck of a ride. Peace out, y'all. Enjoy your weekend.
Why you need the money?